My name's Jen, and I started off as an artist slash academic. I wanted to be an A-list artist, and then I became interested in trying to make videos render or happen in real time in the browser. And then I became a software developer, and now I work at Rangle, which is a software consultancy that embraces agile change and transformation. Today, I'm just going to talk about loading fonts. I'm just going to set my timer in case I go over time. And yeah, so I just want to trace back to when I first started making websites and, how I was going to bring fonts in to my current project was to just go find the free font on freefonts.com or Google Fonts, and then select the correct font weight and, whatever font I wanted, and copy that import statement or the CSS rules. And yeah, hunky dory. Include that in my index.css and it would load, right? Perfect. That was how I did it for a really long time and it worked. But what if the font isn't free and someone like Tiffany & Co. wants you to use their specific font and you can't find it for whatever reason? Like Helvetica actually costs like $200 to buy an actual license of. What if your designer gives you an embedded open type file? What if for some reason you're using Material or Bootstrap and you decide to build a design system on it because you're crunched for time or your designer likes it, and whenever you load it on initial load, you see a flash of the original text or the original font that it was built with? Well, I've had those problems, and that's why I had to go and figure out in my own kludgy way how to do this with styled components, Storybook, React, and the font face rule set. Hopefully in the remaining time, I can kind of go through this real quick. There's a demo also on CodePen and on GitHub. Anyhow, just to pedal back, I wanted to go over, what if in the situation I get a .eot file or an embedded open type file, which is kind of the least supported by all our browsers. In addition to trying to use SVG as a font, then we get the most coverage with TrueType, Web Open Format, and WAF2. WAF2 is your best bet and to line up as the first kind of file format to import. After that, WAF will be your most stable if you want to support IE9 and down. The embedded open type format is like 15 years old or more. And yeah, it's just not well supported. If you get any one of these strange fonts and you want to convert that to a web file format, you can use any of these conversion tools. There's a lot of those. It basically works like any other file conversion tool, and you will get your TrueType or OpenType or web open format font. Wonderful. So I like to arrange my fonts, especially when people use multiple fonts. I like to kind of put it in my my project folder under my source folder, and just to have it be there with the naming and the sorting. But something I like to do also is to make sure that it's accessible to the rest of my project. So I'll rename it and export it. And that's great. We know exactly what name it is, and we can import it and use it in whatever typography components or heading or text components that we're using. 1 second, I'm just going to go back a sec. By this point, your compiler or your IDE is probably complaining. It's telling you that it can't find the module Proxima Nova -bold WAF or OTF, whatever. And why is that? No matter how I've made it clear that I'm importing Proxima Nova regular TTF in my heading or text component, it's not working. And for those of you that use Typescript, it can't really pick up the particular file format as a legit type. So we create a type definition file. I like to make a little type definitions folder, call it typings or types or whatever. And then in my TS config, I make sure that I use the include property that will include it in addition to the node modules at types folder and whatever has the at types, which is by default included on compile. And so that way I make my compiler happy, that's being read. And so you can see here in the first line why I've decided to barrel export those fonts as particular names is to be able to import it. And here I'm setting up my fonts.ts file. So design systems kind of rely on the idea of design tokens or specific style properties as rules. So here I'm just laying out, hey, my main brand font is Proxima Nova, and then our fallback, such as the web-safe system fonts that are going to show up in case for whatever reason the font's not supported on a browser, it's going to be all of these Arial, sans serif, whatever. And I could keep going on because style properties or these tokens, such as letter spacing, font weight, line height, I could keep listing them out and then they can be referenced by my typography components. And then those components can be reused. But this one's just about loading fonts. So next, I'm going to try to create this kind of CSS string of global fonts. And maybe you're going to understand why later. But I want to bring in font face as a, I guess, very cross-browser friendly rule set. And it also has this font display selector that allows us to control and determine the performance or how any font, if we decide to load a custom font, how that shows up in the case it hasn't loaded yet. And so font display optional allows us to, after just 100 milliseconds, to display that after that initial block time. So for the first 100 milliseconds, it's not going to show. And then if it exists, if it loads, then it's going to like show that one. If not, it's going to show the system font or the fallback font. Font display also has an auto and a block and a swap rule. All of those will do some different kind of variation of this. But what we want to avoid through my use of this is the flash of unstyled text, that flash of like initially whatever material framework was built with, that font. I don't want to give away the fact that I'm building on top of that. And I also don't want to give away the fact that, hey, we're going to show the user agent default text before this loads. So there's a little bit of like, hyper persnickety, like, look at this. But what about in Storybook? And I just discovered this like yesterday. Used to be that there was a lot more code and configuration to write, but it seems like in Storybook 6.4, you can use the static DIRs kind of a property in the main.tx as you're setting up Storybook to refer to any folders, documents that contain static files, kind of like when you're using Gatsby, any static files that you want to include in your deployable version of your docs or your software. And so I'm just telling it, hey, take whatever in my source folder, whatever is in that font folder, and bring it into the /static media, because that's where whatever we build from Storybook, that's where it ends up. That's where it's going to reference those fonts. And that's what it looks like. In addition to using font face, I'm using the link tag with the rel attribute with the preload attribute. And this is going to tell it, instead of the usual behavior of using a link tag and having, your whole HTML and your CSS and whatever else scripting parsed, it's going to tell it to prioritize and load this relative link for that WAF file when the HTML is just about to be parsed. So again, saving time, telling it to, do that before the other things should usually happen. And for those of you that do want to use like a CDN or like a third-party API, like Typekit or whatever, there's also the rel attribute pre-connect that's going to avoid like a lot of like back and forth. So yeah, those are a couple things that I've thought about or will include if I have to do it statically or within Storybook. And now finally, just to rewind back to using, styled components and trying to load those custom fonts in our actual React app or design system component library. So I'm bringing create global style from styled components. And what it does is that it will take any kind of a font face or vanilla CSS that's stringified, and then it'll create a component of it. And then we like put it at like the apex or the top level of our app. And that will actually allow our styles to be injected at the top of our React tree. And so that's how it gets inherited down to some of our like heading components here. And then I did some playing around with OTFs, you know, just kind of seeing like, does this actually work like people say it does? Here we have quarter of a second, not throttled, with open type. And you can also find this on my GitHub, this loading custom fonts URL. 167 seconds with like WAF2 on Chrome. And then I tried to throttle, like simulate a throttled 3G phone. And that was 5 seconds to load that particular WAF2 file. And all of this you can find here. It's hard refreshing that. And yeah, that's kind of how I figured how to load a custom font. I've included also like typography components, so you can see how you might want an H1, right? And that H1 by default could be 24 pixels. But then what if your designer gives you something that's like 17 pixels or whatever? So you kind of have to decouple the size you're given from the style, the size that you're given from the actual heading priority at the beginning of your page, just to maintain like semantic accessibility. So this can be kind of illustrated more clearly. Here, created an example. So where you could give it a font size and rem. But if I don't, telling H2, this is just taking whatever the browser thinks that is. Then I can also give it like, I don't know, 3 rem or something. And so in this way, and this is also another font opinion of mine that is not entirely related to loading fonts, but an accessibility tip is to decouple your heading tags from the size of what that heading should be. Because H1, H2, H3, all of these things should matter in terms of importance of the heading, but it shouldn't actually be tied to the size, because your designer might actually want your H1 or the most important heading to be smaller than what that subtitle could be. So yeah, I always kind of make a fuss about that when I'm on Teams. But yeah, thanks for listening. And you can find a lot of this on my GitHub. It's at username.